Welcome, everyone. I'm Glenn Bugala, and I welcome you to this event, which Jerry is going to take from here.
Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. Great to see such a great crowd. I'm Jerry Davis from the Ross School of Business, and on behalf of Business and Impact, Net Impact, and the Ross Tech Innovation Alumni Group, I'm delighted to welcome Afua Bruce, author of The Tech That Comes Next, Back to the University of Michigan. Afua received her MBA from Ross in 2011 and served as the executive director of the White House's National Science and Technology Council, data strategy lead for financial services at the FBI, director of engineering for public interest technology at New America, chief program officer at DataKind, and in her spare time, she teaches at Carnegie Mellon University. Afua, welcome home.
Thank you so much. I am always so glad to be with Michigan folks. So I'm so thrilled to be joining you all tonight.
Yeah, really delighted to have you back. And before we get into the book, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about your path since school. So you've done some fairly non-traditional things for an MBA graduate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really credit my Michigan experience with giving me the courage to try some non-traditional things. Prior to business school, I was a computer engineer at IBM, and I loved engineering and had actually taken a leave of absence at IBM to start at Ross, and had full intention of going back to IBM to do some traditional post-MBA jobs and strategy and more, and sort of work my way up at IBM or in the traditional tech world. While I was at Ross, I realized that I really like some of the social impact stuff. I really like thinking about different spaces to use the business skills that I was gaining combined with my technical skills. And so ended up getting recruited by the FBI out of business school. So the FBI recruits at a handful of top business programs for something called the Special Advisor Program. And so I decided to join that after graduating. And so when I got to the FBI, it was a complete culture shock to me. I'd never worked with anyone in law enforcement before, and now I was at the FBI every day. But I found I really liked it. And there were just so many opportunities to, again, use my technical and now strategy skills together. And so I was able to work with engineers in the FBI's engineering division. I was eventually chief of staff over all of the FBI science and technology. So any crime lab and more, I got to do all of that. And from there, ended up taking the position in the Obama White House as the executive director of the National Science and Technology Council, expanding from one government agencies to then being in charge of policy development across all of the federal agencies that had science and technology components. And then after the administration ended, and I served a few months into the Trump administration for a smooth transition, and then made my way to New America, which is a think tank, which is something I frankly didn't really know what they did prior to moving to DC, but got to explore a lot of the policy aspect there and work with a lot of state and local governments. And then most recently was at DataKind, which is a nonprofit that does data science and AI for other nonprofits all around the world. And now I do my own consulting, working with these types of organizations. And so I think the common thread for me is just really figuring out ways that I can really center ethical use of technology and strategy together to really strengthen communities and to have a positive impact in people's lives. And so it's been a fun journey finding positions and just taking the next job in different spaces that allows me to do that.
Oh, fantastic. I love that. And I did want to announce to the folks on the call that if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat. What we'll try and do is track questions as they come up in the chat, and we might call on you to unmute or just read them out. And because I'm at a business school, we might just cold call you if we feel like, if you're sitting in the back row and not paying attention, we're going to be cold calling you. So welcome back, Afua. So the year that you graduated, Mark Andreessen published this famous essay in the Wall Street Journal called "Why Software is Eating the World." And he argued that we're in the middle of a dramatic and broad technological and economic shift in which software companies are poised to take over large parts of the economy. said, over the next 10 years, I expect many more industries to be disrupted by software, with new world-beating Silicon Valley companies doing the disruption in more cases than not. And as I read your book, in some sense, it's really about what this means for the social impact sector and the ecosystem about it and around it. And I wonder if you could say a few words. You've lived through this decade since business school and watched software eat the world. What has it meant for the social impact sector, for better or worse?
Yeah, absolutely. Technology has really affected the social impact sector in a number of different ways. And so broadly to the piece about software eating the world, many companies now are technology companies under a different name. If you look at a lot of banking institutions, for example, they are driven by the data analysts and the technology experts who are keeping their data safe and doing the analysis and tracking where all those dollars are spent. More, you look at healthcare companies and issues around healthcare records and health data and issues around that. So technology has really been absorbed into a lot of organizations, and that's true in the social sector to some extent. And so it is true in the sense that social impact organizations often end up needing to use technology, whether it is something that they recognize or something that is forced upon them or something that is offered to them in some different ways. And by forced upon, I mean sometimes funders might say, well, we are going to provide you funding specifically for this technology. And so you have something here, maybe someone comes in with a great technology tool or says, I'm a technologist and I'm here to help because I care about this issue. So I'm just going to come in and build you an app that will solve all your problems. But what has ended up happening is that without bringing along people who traditionally aren't technologists, who are focused on the issues and focused on the social issues and focused on the missions, you have a really haphazard approach to technology. And so you have organizations that perhaps haven't embraced technology at all, or technology as it's being used is really fragmented and then ends up sort of competing with the mission. And the dollars can either go to maintain this technology solution or go to help serve more people. And it's not really seen as technology helping to advance the mission of social impact organizations. Or you have starts and stops where something seemed really fun and exciting at the time, and then it wasn't able to maintain. And so I think that is overall where a lot of social impact organizations are. I mean, this creates though a lot of opportunity to do it better, to really embrace what technology and equity and social impact can look like together. It is complex, but there is a space for people in a variety of different roles, a variety of different constituencies to think about how they might shift their work in order for the social impact sector, especially, to more effectively use technology.
Oh, fantastic. You give some lovely examples in the book, and you had a quote that technology grants are gifts in the same way that kittens are gifts. And I thought that was a really striking comment, that a lot of tech companies say, oh, we're going to do our philanthropic work by donating a bunch of software that no one knows how to use, that lives in the cloud, and that is going to require a ton of training to maintain. I wonder if you have sort of examples of how that has played out for better or worse.
Yeah, exactly. This is, I think an example of sometimes where the most well-intentioned gifts may not be practical in the long term, may not be sustainable rather in the long term. And so to the point about gifts of software being like gifts of kittens, they're so cute when you first get them, until you realize that you have to feed it regularly and change the litter box regularly, and you presumably don't want it to die in your care. So you have to continue to do it over and over and over again. And so I think similarly, we see organizations we see tech companies gift social impact organizations specific technologies. Maybe it's a CRM solution, maybe it is a cloud computing solution, maybe it is some infrastructure or even some hardware for that organization. And those gifts are really exciting for that time, but oftentimes, that's over a limited amount of time. And so really then thinking through what this means for those social impact organizations that are receiving these gifts. So what training is involved? And, if it's an injection of new technology, that likely means business processes have to change. And so our organizations actually adequately funded or supported or given the time to change their business process so they smoothly then can work with the technology, I think is a question and some planning that isn't always done. And then the long tail of someone has to maintain these systems at the end. Someone has to continue to update them. There'll be a tech refresh that needs to happen at some point. And so that needs to happen as well. And so I think, one of the things that we argue in the book is that as you're doing technology gifts or even just investments, making sure, especially in the social impact sector, you're thinking through all of that. What's the planning involved? What's the training involved? What's the process change that needs to happen? The technology, sure, it's one of the easiest parts actually often to do. But then also, what does that impact look like? And then through all of that, the thread of are you talking to the people who are actually going to be using the technology or affected by it to make sure that it is actually going to meet their needs, that it'll actually meet the needs of the staff at nonprofits, or it'll actually serve the communities that these nonprofits are working in?
Now, that's a great point, and something that's really central in your book is sort of the theme of nothing about us without us in the tech sector. So you center community when you talk about technology and how it's implemented in consultation with the community rather than just imposing things. And you gave a couple of examples of failure to do that were a bit hair-raising. You talked about Medicaid beneficiaries in Arkansas being required to go online to document that they had a job to be able to claim their benefits in the state that is 50th in access to the internet. And I think you said that they shut the line down at 8 in the evening so that people can't come
yeah, this is one of my exactly, it's one of my favorite, and that I like it the least, examples. And unfortunately, that is not the only example of a government website that is required to use that goes down on a regular basis. So the case in Arkansas with some changes in law, people had to report their work history and their show that they are continuing to make progress against the requirements in order to continue to maintain the benefits to which they are lawfully entitled to. And with the way this system was rolled out in Arkansas, it was rolled out in such a way that, for efficiency, it was, everyone must report online. This also meant that they took away, with their initial rollout, a phone option to report, a mail option to report, and an in-person option to report. And then, as you pointed out, it's a place where broadband access is the least. And then on top of that, the website went down for several hours a day. I think it was maybe 10 or 12 hours a day that the website was down in the evening and overnight hours, where if you were working, you might actually be home to get that. And so definitely a way of how sometimes when technology and policy aren't designed together, when you're not thinking about the communities that actually need to interact with the technology, bad things can happen.
Yeah, and I wonder if you could share some examples of organizations that do this right, like that really took seriously that notion of sort of nothing about us without us. Like, what does it look like for organizations that are really effective at consulting with the community, with drawing in their different stakeholders when they're taking on the technology, implementing it, thinking about how to use it?
Yeah, definitely. So one of my favorite examples, although we have a lot of examples in the book, and I think, 15, 30 of them are my favorite examples, but one of those favorite examples is the story of rescuing leftover cuisine that we talk about in the book. And so rescuing leftover cuisine, or RLC for short, was an organization started by a gentleman in a particular neighborhood with the mission to, as you might guess by the name, rescue leftover cuisine. So taking leftover high quality food from one place and then at the start, literally picking it up and walking it over to neighborhoods where people faced food insecurity. At some point after operating for a while at this very human to human scale, they wanted to build some systems. And so they brought on a nonprofit tech company essentially to help them build out a product that would help manage their process, help them map out things, manage how they were doing work. And one of the ways that they were really intentional about making sure that they were bringing in the community is as they were, they created a Trello board to help look at the different issues that were being addressed and the features that were being added. And they made that board fairly transparent. So staff could see it, some volunteers could see it, and some members of the community could see it as well. And then everyone who had, or a lot of people who had access could upvote different issues or different features that they wanted implemented. And if something was outranked or something had to be switched in the development plan, it was explained as to why. And so that really, increasing the transparency and the accountability there, making sure to bring in the input of, the volunteers who are doing that work of distributing the food and the community members who are on the receiving end of the food or on the giving end of providing the additional cuisine, the additional food that would be redistributed could all weigh into that software to see that. And now you fast forward a couple of years later, and what began as a very, again, human to human scale organization delivering leftover cuisine is now operating in 8 cities around the US, and was able to scale in large part because of the additional systems they had and the way they were able to effectively use technology there. So I think that for me is one really concrete example of how technology can really help advance the mission of social impact organizations and the importance, and one way to really bring in that community input and your volunteer input as well.
That's a lovely example because it's using technology like the Trello board as a vehicle to allow the community to get its input to sort of democratically contribute to choices around features and implementation. So that's fantastic. I guess the caveat is, but if you're in Arkansas and you don't have broadband, that might also limit your ability to contribute to that development, which seems a bit unfortunate. But one of the things that you emphasize is that the technology, you have this lovely quote about the laws of technology. And one of my favorites is that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral, that it's always got a point of view built into it. And I wonder if you could say a bit about whether different flavors of software can help or hinder the missions of social impact organizations. And specifically, you point out that getting a gift of software that is really meant for the commercial sector, a CRM system or something like that, that's really intended for clients. I'm co-teaching a class right now about creating equitable enterprises. We're trying to use a business model canvas. It's like, well, these questions just don't fit with the issues of social enterprise. It's just not really the same thing. And you point out this is true for a lot of software, that it's not really going to fit. I wonder if you find that open source software, or if the flavors of software that are developed in sort of non-commercial settings like Linux or Apache or Lumio, which is sort of like Slack for democracies written by a worker-owned co-op, do you find that there's a difference in those kinds of software as open source work that makes it more amenable to the social impact sector? Or are there other things that influence sort of the shape of technology and its compatibility with social impact? Sorry, that was a long question.
Yeah, no, it's a long question, but it's a very good question, one that I think a lot of organizations, especially those with technologists who are doing this work in the social impact space, think about a lot. And so I would say that the biggest differentiator for software that's going to work well in the social impact space, and I'd actually argue that software that just works well in general for everyone, is when the development process is more inclusive and is more community or user centered. And so, I think an example we give in the book is, with software, if you're saying, example, that you want to have an inclusive process, an inclusive intake process. Again, the book talks primarily about the social impact sector, but I'd argue this is everywhere. And you and when it comes to race, you only have 3 options. That's going to then make a lot of people feel excluded in that process. And so I think that's one example of really making sure that's there. I think, to the quote that you gave, technology isn't good or bad, nor is it neutral. Oftentimes, I think people would like to say, "Oh, we'll just use the technology, or we'll just look at the data," forgetting that data and technology are human constructs. They don't naturally exist in the world. They were created by humans and are susceptible then to a lot of the biases that humans have. And so you have to be really intentional, to be really inclusive, really deliberate in that process, to make sure that your data sets recognize everyone who should be recognized in the data sets, that you're testing any algorithms that you're building with, especially data science and machine learning and AI, and you're only deciding to use them if they're actually proving to be accurate, and not that they are only 5% accurate. You go with something like that. So I think that's there. On the open source question, I think that there are a lot of open source projects that are managed in the social impact. And there are also open source projects that are more tied to the private sector. And again, I'd say, it's about what is that tie to the community and to the users that are actually using it. So I think in the book, we talk about ComCare, which is a really popular healthcare, frontline health services related software that's used in many countries and is open source. But I think one of the things that's there is that it's really tied to the community of frontline health system workers and people who are in that world as they're deciding on what features to do, and the testing and more that they do. So I think that interaction is what makes that type of open source software successful.
Oh, great. And so I work at a nonprofit organization myself. I like to think of us as a social impact organization. We're a university, and an unnamed IT director that I know said, one of the problems is every time we train people on Salesforce, they get a much higher paying job in the private sector, and so we can't hang on to them. So I'm wondering if you encounter something similar in the social impact sector. So it feels like the war for talent can be, I don't know if it's a double-edged sword or just a single-edged sword, but in order to hire the people that you need to be able to make thoughtful choices and implement things well, they're going to require a level of skill that makes them very attractive to the for-profit sector. And options in the nonprofit world don't really pay off quite the same way. So I wonder if you see that sort of occurring, or and are there sort of counter tendencies? So.
Yeah, absolutely. That is absolutely occurring. It's something that I've faced ever since starting to work in the social impact sector. I was fortunate when I graduated in Michigan to have, I think, maybe 4 job offers. And I took the one at the FBI, which was the lowest paying one of all 4. So I feel this challenge intimately. It is unfortunately where the space is now, I think, for a variety of reasons. We were talking about incentives before. One measure of success or effectiveness of a nonprofit, historically has been that percentage of, the percentage of dollars that go directly to the clients. And unfortunately, salaries often decrease that percentage. And so I think that's the reason for some of these structural issues for why salaries and such are lower in the space. And then especially as the prominence of tech rises, as software is eating the world, especially the salaries we've seen at the same time for strong technical talent have increased. And so I think what's important here to do is just to recognize that there are different values and different returns on your own personal investment if you decide to enter the social impact sector or to stay in the social impact sector. I think that we can I think a conversation to be had is, especially with foundations and donors, about what salary should we be paying to attract and to retain top talent in the social impact sector, and what is reasonable there. I think that's a conversation that we can continue to have. I think also recognizing that people going in between sectors is okay. And so someone like myself might start out in the private sector and then find themselves in the social impact sector, and then might go from the social impact sector back to the private sector. And so a little bit of that transition, or a lot of that transition, is okay as well. And so also thinking about ways for shared services and to ease some of the training process and onboarding process, I think are things that as a social impact sector, we could think about doing a little bit more intentionally to help manage some of that tech talent churn.
I wonder if you've seen sort of mechanisms or ways that people can draw on tech talent without having to hire it full time. So are there, I don't know, 1 day a week sabbaticals to work, in the impact sector, or have you seen organizations that have come up with clever ways to draw on tech talent without necessarily having the budget to hire Mark Andreessen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think some private sector companies are starting to experience this experiment rather with this more and more. So providing some of their employees a few hours a week or a day a week to work on a project of their choice, which could be something social impact related. Some companies are even exploring longer term sabbaticals for, if you wanted to do a year of government service, for example. And so allowing their employees to take, a year to serve in government and then come back to their organization. So you're seeing that more and more. There are some organizations such as DataKind, where I used to work, that do provide frameworks and structures for people who have full-time jobs or part-time jobs in the private sector and want to work in the social impact sector, a way to sort of match their talents with a specific social impact organization that is looking for those specific talents, but also provide, in DataKind's cases, for example, provide some of the critical context in shaping that is so important to developing strong solutions that will be sustainable in the social impact space. I think there are a couple of different there. I think, again, we should continue to have a conversation about sort of salaries and incentive structures so that people who want to do this work can do this work and can do it sustainably for themselves as well.
Oh, thank you. So you've watched a decade's worth of development since you finished your graduate degree. And I guess I would characterize that as the decade of mobile in some sense, that the shift of the web from sort of laptops to mobile has really reshaped the industry and employment and brought about businesses like Uber and Lyft that would have been pretty hard to imagine before that. I wonder how that shift has affected the social impact sector, if at all. Are there things that are sort of specific? I guess I have one example. One of our beloved BBA alums, Jack Griffin, started a social enterprise called Food Finder to allow people with food insecurity to locate things, using geolocation to find where can I get access to food when I'm in need. And that's also blowing up. We're very excited about Jack and his work. But I wonder if you've seen some trends that have come about because of the shift to mobile, or other things that stood out over the last decade.
Yeah. So I think there are multiple examples here of things that have happened. I'll start with the negative and then we'll go to the more positive examples. So I think on the negative side, there is, for some reason, a strong temptation for people who can develop technology to, create an app for everything, or want to create an app for everything. And, we're probably not going to solve hunger with an app. We're probably not going to solve every health issue that people have with an app. We're probably not going to solve poverty with an app. And so sometimes this desire to sort of, to heard about an issue that you now really care about and to fund and create and deploy an app, doesn't go of anywhere in the long term, sometimes even in the short term, but does often take a lot of time of those community members and in meeting with folks and things like that. So I'd say that is probably the biggest thing of, I'm here, I can build an app for you and we'll solve all your problems. And it just takes a lot of time from people who are really invested in a long-term solution. That said, the shift to mobile and, especially when you look on a global scale, again, this is why communities really matter. There's several communities in the US where people don't have access to smartphones. And so if you are building some type of, let's say, benefits delivery program and a smartphone interface is the only thing that you have, you are therefore, automatically excluding people who don't have access there. But then you look in, several African countries where where more people are mobile than have access to computers computers with high-speed internet on a regular basis. And so there, in that community, a more mobile solution might be more efficient. So I think it again comes back to what communities are you serving? What do they need? How do they need to interact with whatever services you're provided, and then going from there.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. I mean, thank you very much. That is really, mobile really seems to have spread the internet to places it would not otherwise have been. People that might not have imagined buying a computer for themselves, but of course they're going to get a phone. It's got a built-in map, and so, but not everybody can afford a smartphone, and it's not universal penetration. I wonder. It just occurred to me. I wonder how COVID has impacted specifically sort of the impact sector in the world that you're writing about. I realize you were writing the book during this time, so you might not have had sort of quite as much time to write about it, but I wonder if you've observed things induced, for better or worse, by COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I think the social impact sector, like all sectors, is reacting to COVID and still, conversations about tech equity and how organizations use tech, how they're able to let people work remotely, how they're able to find people that they're serving and continue to engage with them, are questions that the social impact sector, as a number of other sectors, had to answer and are still having to answer. I think it was a study by Deloitte, I think, that predicted after 5 years of the start of the pandemic, we'll see a lot fewer nonprofits, and just with changes in funding and things like that. So I think that's a practical risk. Also, again, just the issue of how you interact. One of the clients that I have, nonprofit clients that I'm working with now, one of their challenges is they provided they helped people navigate the benefit system so that they could get benefits that they are legally entitled to. And they did a lot of that in a face-to-face way. So having fairs, going into people's homes, going into people's schools to reach people and help them get access to the benefits they're legally entitled to. But in the peak of COVID world, and even now, even as some folks are emerging from the most severe COVID restrictions, navigating how do you then provide these services? How do you even find the same people when you're used to showing up in communities physically? And so what does that mean to now transfer your whole business model virtually, or to do hybrids or something in between? So I think questions like that are things that a lot of social impact organizations are really thinking through. We've seen a lot of social impact organizations weather it well. I think especially intentional use of technology has been really helpful. One of the projects that DataKind had done, for example, was with Plentiful, which is an organization in New York City that is an app, a well-designed app that lets people look at a number of food pantries together. And so you can go and see which food pantry has food, and basically reserve your spot in the line so you're not waiting in line as much. And some of the feedback we got at DataKind was they were in part able to handle some of their surge because they had this system that could help the dashboards that DataKind had built, the data science dashboards that DataKind had built to help predict shortages, to identify problems, and more. And so I think social impact organizations who had been able to take advantage of some of the technology or different processes and being, again, tied in with their community to really see how their community needed to get information were a bit better.
Yeah. It does feel like one of the impacts of COVID, the only potential silver lining, if you can call it that, is everyone had to figure out how to get online, like one way or another. And in many cases, that one way could be, I have to sit in the parking lot of McDonald's because I don't have broadband access at home, and the only way I'm going to connect with my classes is to watch them online, from some publicly accessible Wi-Fi spot. But it did sort of nudge everyone in the direction of learning at least sort of the basic online skills. So who knows how that'll play out. And I guess that brings us to my last big-ish question before we shift over to letting folks on the call dial in. So your book is called The Tech That Comes Next. Highly recommended to everyone. And you talk about 5 sets of constituencies: social impact organizations, technologists, funders, policymakers, and communities. You have chapters devoted to each of them. You have great cases. So what is coming up next? What is the tech that comes next? And maybe you have different thoughts for those different constituencies, but what can we look forward to? What's coming down the pike?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, one of the tricks or secrets about this book that isn't really a secret is, the tech that comes next. We're here to the tech, but we're to talk communities and equity. And so what comes next is really being more intentional about how we define equity and then how we, for social impact organizations, really look to invest in technology for the communities that you serve, really looking at what data systems they're using and making sure that's done in equitable ways. When it comes to technologists, I think really expanding the definition of who gets to be a technologist. And so really diversifying on a number of different aspects who we see as technologists. And then, also tying that in with ethics, security, and privacy for any type of technology that is built in general, but especially sector where you're dealing often with so much personally identifiable information or just sensitive data. On the funders and investors constituency, I see that there as really, creating space to allow people to experiment, to find what works for their communities, that have opportunities to share with other organizations doing something similar, and to really look at what new business models might be available or we might create in order to really support this structure of doing that work. And then with policymakers, really looking for ways that we can improve the tech that's used in policymaking, whether it's hearing from people more directly, but then also helping to strengthen some of the policy we make about technology. There's everything from broadband access to standards for security and privacy, or ethical use of algorithms, and looking for the policy there. And I think finally, for communities, this thread that cuts across everything is really making sure that we are moving, sort of collectively beyond charity and really looking for some shared ownership structures and ways to really resource communities holistically. And so getting away from some of the, I'm funding A and B, but not C, D, and E, even though everyone would like them all together. And so, really looking at resourcing communities holistically.
Oh, fantastic. So my computer is telling me that your network bandwidth is low, which seems highly ironic. So it's been a bit hiccuping a little bit. I don't know if, Glenn, is that happening for other folks as well, or is that just me?
I'm so sorry.
No, not a problem. I hate to ask. I wonder if it makes sense to stop the video, or is that a bad idea? just to sort of increase the bandwidth for your voice?
Sure, I can stop the video and hopefully that takes care of any issues.
I hate to do that. Glenn, you can tell me if this is a terrible idea, but okay, great. And I guess sort of jumping off that last question, and then we will sort of turn to the audience for any questions that they have. I wonder if you've seen anything in the realm of policy making and democracy. You talked about how sort of new tools are opening up ways to better understand constituencies and what their preferences are. And it's always struck me as surprising that we have the technology to enable democracy on a daily level. I mean, we could be taking votes using the single transferable voting algorithms and ranked choice voting for where we're going to go to lunch. I mean, we could be doing democracy on a daily basis. We could be collecting data. And it feels like the technology could really enable a really strong level of community input and democracy. And yet one weeps to see some of the ways that technology is being used to shut down democracy, to sort of enable demagoguery and not really to take advantage of that. I wonder if you've seen any green shoots that give you optimism about technology being used, more for community, more for democracy that we didn't manage to cover so far.
Yeah, I think what's I think one positive from these past couple of years that we've all been living through a pandemic is that it has forced some policymakers to think a little bit differently about how to engage with communities, how to engage with their constituencies through technology. And so everything from how court systems work, and so being able to file things electronically or to connect remotely for some lower level court cases, for example, I think is really helpful. Looking at ways to do more community town halls and listening sessions and to hear from people directly by taking advantage of some of the technology. I think that those types of things are really good. I think also we've seen advances in policies around broadband access and other technology access, and looking at developing a little bit more of a technical infrastructure. And so I think funding that's been made available for that is really promising. And hopefully as that funding is spent and new tools and technologies are developed, we'll see greater impact in communities directly.
Oh, great. I do have to give shout out to Allied Media Project here in Detroit, which I love and think is really in the vanguard of equitable technology usage. So if you haven't met Allied Media Project yet, everyone who's here at the University of Michigan and beyond, connect with them. They're very thoughtful, sort of movement-based organization, thinking about the equitable use of technology. I think very congruent with what Afua has been describing to us. I would love at this point to open things up to anyone in the audience who has some questions that they might like to ask. And you can pop something into the chat or maybe just unmute yourself and ask.
I do have a question that came in from Noah Stein. Do you think that computer science students, or in other words, the next generation of engineers who will be building future technology, should be taught some form of ethics or public interest related coursework?
Yes, I feel strongly that computer science students and engineering students should be taught some form of ethics. I actually helped co-launch the Public Interest Technology University Network, which is a network now of about 50 universities who've committed to teaching public interest technology, which is essentially applying technology expertise to problems that are in the public interest or promote the public good. And so part of that is teaching people the skills to manage sort of short-term needs versus long-term perspective taking and ethics. I would also just note that computer scientists are, future engineers, or, future creators of technology, engineers or future creators of technology. But we will also in the future also see people who perhaps don't have the degrees in computer science and computer engineering who are also creating technology. And we should make sure that a broader ethics education can happen so that folks who come into technology from different angles also can make some of these trade-offs. But yes, absolutely, we should be teaching things about the public interest and ethics in our more technical courses.
I wonder if you could drill down a little bit on that. Like, what would be 3 things you would want someone to leave such a course knowing? Like, are there big themes or sort of hidden obstacles or issues that might not be evident to people?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one is really around data and the biases that creep into data before doing any other type of engineering. And so teaching people how to look for and to identify bias in data, whether it is around demographic information, whether it's around a wide variety of sources. And so having people look at that. I think another is, especially for computer science and computer engineering students, to really look at, accuracy and recognizing that accuracy matters. And, we're not looking for algorithms probably that are 100% accurate. That would be quite impressive if someone is consistently able to deliver something they say is 100% accurate. I would have other questions about that, but also recognizing that sometimes, you just shouldn't be moving forward with something because of some of the inaccuracies that are there. And then I think finally, recognizing when technology isn't the solution. I think we spend a lot of time, and again, my undergraduate degree is in computer engineering. I spend a lot of time with engineers even today. Used to be an executive at the nonprofit that did data science and AI. And we spend a lot of time really focusing on how we can come up with the greatest technology and how we can deploy it and all the cool uses for it. But also recognizing that technology isn't the answer to everything. The newest, greatest, flashiest technology isn't the answer to everything. And so teaching people also that it is okay to, and I think I would argue, especially in the social impact sector, part of the responsibility of a technologist to not over design things. I get a lot of questions about blockchain, for example, and several times, like, just create a database and we'll be fine. And so I think that's the third thing, is recognizing that the newest, greatest, fanciest, most advanced technology isn't always a solution, but if it is the right solution, know how to do it well.
Great, thank you so much. Eric Schwartz, professor of marketing and data scientist, has a question for you.
Hi, Afua. Thank you so much. I'm excited to take a look at the book. I have a question about, on the topic of biases built into data, along with all the people that will be using that data and those methods. Thinking about, how do you think about teaching data, data science, and all of these ethical practices to less technical students, say in a business school? What are the kind of roles and responsibilities that we all should have in mind as we are educating next generation of business leaders who won't necessarily be getting into the code and into the depths of every algorithm, but will be using and consuming their output? How do you think about ensuring they're working with it ethically and appreciate the, say, issues of non-representativeness of data that you alluded to?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the questions that we have at the end of each of our chapters, we give some questions for people who are non-technical for how they should be thinking about interacting with technologists. And so I think some specific questions are available there. But I'm adjunct faculty at Carnegie Mellon, actually, in their public policy school and information science school. And so I teach a lot of students who are not technical about this as well, and really focus on how do you look at a data set, and how do you just, ask, where did this data come from? Did we have the ability to, did we have the legal right to collect this information? Who owns the data and who controls access to this data? Because that can really tie to how long you can use that estimation. And then ask for any shortcomings in the data. This is something I do with my, I did with the data science teams directly. I just ask them for what are shortcomings in the data, because even as a non-technical person, you should be able to ask that question. And if you don't get back an answer, it's probably an indication that someone else didn't think about it along the way either. And so I think that's something to be aware of. And then I think, some basic stats knowledge of correlation versus causation, and confidence intervals, and that is really important to teach as well.
Excellent. Fantastic. And we have a question from Faith Zimmerman.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I am just curious, this ethical technology, we've talked about it, is so important for so many different people and so many different types of things. So what do you think is the best way for us, who you've just taught about how important this technology is, to advocate for this technology, both from within tech companies, as well as for those of us who won't work in tech outside of this technology as sort of consumers?
I'm sorry, could you restate the second half of your question?
Yeah. So one, how can we advocate for ethical technology from within tech companies? And then also, how can we advocate, if we're not working in tech, how can we advocate as consumers for this ethical technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I think for the first one, how you can advocate for ethical technology within tech companies is just asking about it, right? I think that oftentimes the questions is sort of technology and, of ethics and technology, the use of technology as well, or even, who was included in the design process for technology. Those assumptions often aren't questioned from within tech companies themselves. And so I think, just by starting to ask the question, I think that can start to advance the conversation in some tech companies. I'll note that sometimes it is hard to do this, both because of the position, or there have been some high profile removals of some folks who've really pushed for ethics and technology at large companies, including Google and Facebook, for example. But I do think that asking those questions is a way to start that conversation. And then for outside of those tech companies, how you can sort of push for change, I think, again, it's asking about it. And so, sometimes that is, asking lawmakers about it, who can then ask from a regulatory or a threat of regulation perspective. We're partnering up with a number of civil society organizations that are in multi-sector partnerships, or in discussions rather, with the private sector to really hold them to task on things like civil rights and technology, whether it's with facial recognition or search algorithms, and more. So I think finding some of those spaces, such as the Algorithmic Justice League comes to mind, the Center for Democracy and Technology, CDT is the acronym, I'm pretty 90% sure that's what it stands for, come to mind, and others to help advocate and to really interact with people who know this, who are in it, and could use some stronger voices.
Oh, fantastic. I realize that it's a little odd to have you not be on video, and it sounds like the network may have come back. So I wonder if we could get you back for the last couple of minutes to.
Yeah, we'll try it.
All right, I think we're back. I don't know what the issue was with the network, but I think we're in good
Great.
shape again. Do we have maybe one last yes or no question? Professor M.S. Krishnan, also author of many technology books. Yes, Krishnan. And you want to unmute.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Afua, for your time. And really appreciate you spending time with our community, and welcome back to Ross virtually. just like Jerry, and I'm his colleague, and I had another initiative called Business Plus Tech. And I was actually curious from your comments. You did mention that use of technology in this social impact project should go beyond charity. And do you have also, what is your experience in seeing examples around, more in the developing parts of the world where technology is, kind of in some sense emerging as a great equalizer? I like one of my mentors used to, say 30 years back, technology is, a great equalizer only next to death and taxes. So, which is basically, do you have examples of how that is being, deployed in some of those solutions and going beyond charity?
Yeah, I think so. So, one of the examples that I briefly touched on earlier is ComCare, which is the open source platform that is very much an international development issue that's there. And so people from all around the world are plugged into the ComCare community, into updating that. So I think that's one example. Last year, 2020, one of my clients was a large organization that actually ran a data science for social impact challenge. And we ended up getting, close to 2,000 applications from all around the world. And so what was really exciting there is just confirmation of people using data science and AI in really interesting ways all around the world. And so, I remember reviewing proposals from India, looking at how to use data science to help small farm owners. And so how they could continue to stay abreast of like pricing changes and working in communities there, working with a variety of healthcare organizations in many African countries. One of the projects that I got to touch while I was at DataKind was actually one was around doing basically some OCR analysis for in partnership really for an organization working in Nigeria and Uganda, I believe. And they'd had a backlog for of entering their health records. Basically, the frontline health systems workers are taking it and entering their data by hand, and then it should be entered in a computer somewhere. And so we were able to partner with that organization on the ground, Nigeria, to then to write something to basically automate that process. And what had taken nearly a month can now be done in about 8 hours to do that. And so I think those are a couple of examples of ways that.
So were they all or some of them for-profit organization, not a charity, but for-profit, but they were able to execute a business model serving these customers?
So both of those examples, the healthcare example I gave was a nonprofit. I believe the farm holders one was a for-profit entity that was there.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think between Jerry and myself, we'd certainly like to have you in person back in Ross to connect with our student community.
And I would love to get back to Ann Arbor, so yeah. I will gladly accept that invite.
100%. Well, Afua, thank you so much for coming back, sharing your insights with us, sharing the book with us. It's been an action-packed hour. We've really been excited to have you back here. We would love to see you in person. And thank you again for making Ross proud.
Yeah, thank you so much again. I am so glad to be part of the Michigan community, and so excited to be back here with you all today. And go blue.
Go blue.
Go blue. Thanks, friends.
Yeah, thanks.